and welcome everyone to the final TAFE talks of 2022. Before I begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we meet today, right across Australia, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples we may have with us today. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. So, thank you all for joining us. It's been a very big year for TDA and for our members. We thought it would be a good opportunity to take stock and reflect on the achievements and highlights from the past year, and also to have a look at the big ticket items that will be coming up for TAFEs in 2023. So on that, you're probably already aware that Professor Peter Dawkins has just been announced as the Interim Director of the new Jobs and Skills Australia body. And TDA is very pleased to announce that Professor Dawkins has agreed to participate in our first TAFE talks of 2023. That's going to be held on Wednesday, the 25th of January, and I understand registration is already open. And we'll put the link for registrations in the chat box if you're interested in joining us for that. So before I continue, I'd like to introduce the panel members that we have with us here today. Firstly, we have Mary Ferrone, who is Chair of the TDA Board and CEO of Holmes Glen Institute in Victoria. Welcome, Mary. We also have Grant Dreyer, who is a TDA Board member and CEO of TAFE. We have Margot McNeil, who is the Chief Product and Quality Officer at TAFE New South Wales, and Jenny Dodd, the CEO of TDA. So thank you all today for joining us. So I'd like to turn to Mary first to set the scene a little bit for us in terms of looking back over the past year. So 2022 has been a pivotal year impacting Australia's skills, vocational education and higher education policy environments. We've had various state and federal elections. We've seen the establishment of the new body Jobs and Skills Australia. There's been ongoing vet reform at the Commonwealth level, ongoing negotiation and some progress made on the National Partnership Agreement. And TDA had a seat at the table at the Jobs and Skills Summit. There's also been a lot of media around fee-free TAFE and vet places. So Mary, from a TDA board perspective, what have been some of the key highlights and achievements for TAFE this year, particularly in terms of our engagement on the national skills agenda?
Thanks, Lyndall, and hello to everyone, and great to be here today on this panel. Lyndall's just taken away a lot of the things I was going to say about our achievements, but I'm going to talk about them anyway. I think certainly the Jobs and Skills Summit and our participation in that, and being invited to not only be a participant at the summit but also to present at the summit, was a real I think it's a real testament to the value that this government places on TAFEs around the country, and also I think the value of TDA as an organisation representing those TAFEs. I think it was important for us to be there, but it was doubly important, I think, to have been part of the presentation at the summit. So I think that was a really a very big key achievement from the board perspective. We were really pleased, that Jenny was there as a participant, but that we were also invited there as a presenter. I think Jenny and the team have worked really well since the new government came in May to develop a really strong relationship with the Minister, the Honourable Brendan O'Connor, and his staff, and I think that's been really a great achievement for us. Certainly the Prime Minister's announcement at the summit in regards to the fee-free places that are available in TAFE, and now it's been expanded slightly to vet, but predominantly in the TAFE area, was a fabulous way to start the summit. That was the opening, and so again it placed TAFE at the heart of the skills and jobs agenda. I think there's still a lot of work for us to do, and we're happy to take that on board, and Jenny and her team will continue those conversations, but it is really important that we continue to engage, I think, at that national level. I think it was really important and a great achievement for TAFE everywhere that the Prime Minister visited a TAFE college. And it happened to be my TAFE college in Victoria, and I'm not saying that just because it was my TAFE college, but my understanding, it was the first time a Prime Minister has visited a TAFE college in Victoria itself. So again, and very soon after he was elected. So I think that showed, again, great faith and in the TAFE sector, and great promise of things to come. As you said, Lyndall, the announcement of Jobs and Skills Australia, now, of course, we have Professor Dawkins, who's going to head that up in an interim fashion. I think is important, but what is more important, I think, for us, and Jenny may talk about this a bit later, is how we engage in that process of establishing, I suppose, an agenda for Jobs and Skills Australia, and ensuring that TAFE is part of that discussion. And of course, I think one of our great achievements this year was the conference in Adelaide. It was a great success. We had, remind me, but it was over 470 participants at that conference. Great testament again to the work of Jenny and her team, but also that, you know, we were really keen to get together. We had great speakers, and there was a great vibe right across the conference days. And I think that was a great success for us. And what appears to be, you know, the start of a very good period of time for TAFEs at a national level. So I'll just leave that there for now. Lyndall, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Jenny, you were also at the Jobs and Skills Summit. So what were your impressions?
Thanks, Lyndall, and thanks, Mary, and hello to everybody who's joining us today. Yeah, Mary has said it, but I want to re-emphasise. I was sitting there at my little space, and we were a bit COVID spaced at the Jobs and Skills Summit, and I was ready to, you know, participate, listen, etc. And then the Prime Minister came on, and the first thing he said was about the free fee TAFE. That was absolutely the first thing of this highly billed event that had industry, you know, champions, industry captains. It had the not-for-profit sector in the audience with CEOs of not-for-profits. It had unions and leaders of unions, and it had government stakeholders. In front of me were all of the premiers, a couple of rows in front of me. All of them were there, or the skills ministers, but mostly the premiers, because they'd had the cabinet the day before. And so right from the get-go, TAFE was front and centre of that event. And that was actually quite amazing, because, you know, we haven't been front and centre of anything for over a decade. So that was a fantastic outcome. The second thing, though, I want to talk about, and I think this does link to what happened out of the Jobs and Skills Summit. One of the areas that I thought was amazing and really dynamic was the discussion around, we live in full employment. We haven't seen full employment like this since the 1970s. And for those of you who are at the convention, you heard Danielle Wood, who was also at the Jobs and Skills Summit, speak about that. But what that conversation was about, so what does it mean for skills? And what it means for skills is all of those people in our environment for whom the job market has been often a closed door, now have opportunities like they never had before. And that's beholden then on us in TAFE, with these free TAFEs places, to actually deliver on some of the equity principles that were being discussed. And so at the Jobs and Skills Summit, some of the things that were really strong was a student panel, that's slip into TAFE work, a panel of young people, wasn't a student panel at all, a panel of young people who had had varying obstacles for their participation in the labour market. One woman was a young refugee woman. Two young men spoke, one from an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background who had been in foster care since he was 6 months old, another who had had significant disadvantage in his life that had, through drugs and alcohol right throughout his life, that had precluded him. There was a young woman who was a carer of a child, and there was a young woman who was blind. These 5 young people were very, very powerful in terms of their ability to access the job market. Additional to that were the conversations around equity and women's pay, equal opportunity, which has been a mantra for really all my working life, but has not actually seen it fruition in terms of equal pay. Huge conversations around equity for women was very strong at the Jobs and Skills Summit. And I think those priorities shifted the conversation so dramatically around what do we need to do in a full employment market if we are actually going to see increased productivity, if we are going to see increased wages. We have to open the doors to these untapped resources that Australia has, and for the individuals, these untapped opportunities that they have been excluded from. I think that was very, very strong. And one of the things that we've been pleased to see from that is the wraparound services that have come with free TAFE. And we might talk about that a little bit later on, because we advocated hard for that in the lead up, and it was delivered. The other conversation that I think was very strong at the summit was around clean energy. And we know that because this government came in saying we are going to move forward with a policy. And there was a lot of discussion around what does it mean? And that was also from those who are leading large industry bodies and large industry peak bodies. That was strong. So we had the equity conversation, we had the full employment, we had the clean energy, we had conversations around foundation skills and the importance of foundation skills. And that also led into digital capability and what that means for the Australian workforce, for the skills that we need in the future. So they were some of the big ticket items that were discussed right throughout the 2 days. And I was actually sitting beside the chair of the Tech Council, and she gave a very strong call to things that require learn and earn in tech skills, because the demand is just so overwhelming. Now, we're the learn and earn sector, if you ask me. So this was more a call to higher education. So they were some really powerful messages that came out. And we'll explore some of those as we go along in the next 40 minutes or so. Thanks, Lyndall.
Thanks, Jenny. Just before I move on, I forgot to mention at the beginning that our participants today will have a chance to have a Q&A session with our panellists at the end of my questions. But if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask as we go along, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we'll look at them at the end. So just following on from Jenny's comments, since the change of government, there's also been a change in the narrative around TAFE. We've heard Minister O'Connor say that TAFE should always be at the heart of the VET and the skills sector, and Mary, you mentioned that as well. Grant, do you have any reflections on this change in narrative and what it's meant for us and for TAFEs?
Thanks, Lyndall, and good afternoon, everybody. Look, I think it's fantastic that TAFE's being talked about now as part of the solution, rather than the cause of the problem that might have been the narrative in the past. So that's quite refreshing, and there's probably, I think, a recognition that a lot of the heavy lifting of full qualifications and social mobility happens out of TAFE institutes across the country, and there's recognition of that. So that seems, I think, for me to be a positive. Also, having skills as a key focus, I think perhaps we can thank the government for that, but I also think that COVID probably put a little bit of a spotlight on how important skills and skill shortages and the workforce is to the country. So, you know, that to me, I think was really, really positive. I have some degree of bias because Peter Dawkins was my boss for 10 years at Victoria University. But, you know, we've put an interim director, the government's put an interim director into Jobs and Skills Australia that has actually managed vocational education programs in the past. So whilst he's also a very experienced researcher and bureaucrat, he has had 10 years of really high exposure to the vet sector and to TAFE, and I made sure he had that. So hopefully that'll stand us in some good stead there. So, you know, people are listening, and I think that's really important. What I wouldn't underestimate, though, is the degree of responsibility that we have to deliver on the government's expectations of us. You know, we've had, I think sometimes when you're not under the spotlight, things can be a little bit easier. But now that we are under the spotlight and we are part of the solution, that to me comes with great responsibility to us as TAFE institutes to deliver on this for the government, but also to deliver on it for our individual communities and states that we work in. Thanks.
Thanks, Grant. Margot, do you have any thoughts on the changing narrative and its effect on TAFEs?
Yes, thanks, Lyndall, and I'll add my welcome to everyone. I'm joining from Gadigal land today here it's part of the Eora Nation in Sydney, so thank you for joining us for the discussion. And I guess following on from the other panel members, I feel a real sense of optimism at the moment, but I agree with Grant, we do have this opportunity and also the responsibility that comes with us, because there's almost like a recognition of the importance of our skills that TAFEs typically deliver to, but also our expertise and experience in that space. TAFE New South Wales, we talk about having been around for 130 years or so, and that feels like it's our moment in time when we can help be participating in that discussion around addressing those skills gaps. So things like the Future Made in Australia plan, all the critical sectors that we've typically focused on are part of that, but also our oft-spoken about connections with industry partners and local communities, and the fact that we have typically been supporting the students that haven't necessarily flown through their schooling years. So we're kind of good at that equity piece. We just have to really grasp onto that opportunity to sing our own praises, I would say, and really herald the successes we've had. So when I was thinking about some of the opportunities that came out of the summit, I was thinking of here we are in the vet space where we've been so constrained about things like the qualifications framework, the national framework that we operate in. And yet all of our TAFEs had to lurch forward into a very strong digital presence because of all the restrictions we had during COVID times. So we've been able to innovate even in a very constrained environment. And it's also true, we'll talk a little bit more about the TDA Convention later, but that's where we see some of the great practice in terms of innovation. You know, TAFE New South Wales does a whole lot of things around renewable energy that's directly working with industry, and all the other TAFEs do that as well because we are so well connected with industry. So I think that's where we've got this moment to showcase what we do, to build on the strengths that we already have, and to make sure, to Jenny's point, that we actually are part of the conversation of how we craft our own future together. So I was really energised when we came out of the sort of discussions around this changing environment we're in.
Thanks, Margot. Jenny, given Grant's and Margot's comments, how do you think this changing narrative has impacted the way in which the Commonwealth Government is working with TDA and the TAFE sector?
One of the things that it seems to really be summed up in is the consistency of our Minister O'Connor's messaging around TAFE being the anchor. And he's been consistent around that in every context in which he presents, including a couple of weeks ago when he was presenting to our colleagues who are private training providers, and his comment was, for a strong vocational education and training sector, we need strong TAFE. He was welcoming and encouraging of the multiplicity that is across our sector in terms of the types of businesses who do engage with vocational education and training. And of course, we also respect quality colleagues who may not be TAFE. But I think the way in which that comes across is saying that the sector will be stronger as TAFE is the heart and the anchor. And I think that consistency of messaging is really important. And I think the other thing that's happened, and I want to commend this government on this, because I think it's broader than just our sector. It's across a range of areas in which TDA gets involved, because we also have connections with DFAT, we have connections with the Department of Home Affairs on behalf of the TAFEs, but particularly with the Department of Education in the higher education and international leadership, international students leadership space. There's significant consultation occurring. And one of the ways in which this government is actually engaging is saying, yes, we've got ideas, but we're not the owners of all the good ideas, and we actually want to hear from you. And I think that means that TDA, on behalf of TAFEs, has had a seat at the Commonwealth table on a multitude of forums, and that's given us the opportunity to re-cement the importance of TAFE as the anchor part of vocational education and training.
Thanks, Jenny. So that leads on really to my next question. So 2022 has been a very big year for Commonwealth skills reform. So we've got the new industry advisory arrangements in the pipeline. There's qualification reform, review of the RTO standards, vet data streaming, etc., streamlining, etc. So Jenny, I know that you're on a number of Commonwealth stakeholder groups and advisory committees, and that you're very much engaged in the specifics around skills reform. So can you highlight some of those key reforms and give us a sense of where things are at with them?
Thanks, Lyndall. So some of the big ticket reforms, which many of you will know, those of you who are engaging here will know, but I'm just going to highlight some of them, and I'm going to actually call out for you sitting in your TAFEs as well, where you really need to be engaging. The first of that is around the qualification reform. Now, the qualification reform is going to produce some guidelines to our new industry clusters who are in the process of final negotiations with the Commonwealth around how they will develop product. But more importantly for the industry clusters, their brief is to actually work under the leadership, I think, of the Jobs and Skills Australia new advisory body in terms of forecasting skills demand for their industry cluster area. So in terms of the intersect of those three pieces, it's very important intersect in that the qualification reform will see a move away from prescription. We're very excited about that in terms of training packages that for the last 10 years have become homes of what you've got to do in a step-by-step dogmatic sort of way, as opposed to having an outcomes focused. And there's a real opportunity for that piece of qualification change to see some really strong outcomes if it's allowed to, if it doesn't become overwhelmed by bureaucracy and replacement terminology for old practice. And that to some extent is a bit of the fear we have sitting around there. In terms of that, please engage. If there's a consultation occurring around qualification reform in your state or territory, get involved, because I think the more voices we have at the table, the better. The second part is around industry clusters. And we know that this was on the agenda for the previous government and is now in the final stages of rollout. The original plan was that there would be 9. It's quite likely that there'll be a few more. There's been no announcement, but we would expect that in the next couple of weeks. And we understand that there'll be an announcement of the first iteration of those, and then that'll be followed up with further announcements. In fact, we're expecting some of those announcements will occur early next week. So the industry clusters are in the formation, and the industry clusters, as you know, replace all those industry reference committees with these new larger groupings that have the major brief of looking at what are the skills needs of their sectors, and then a secondary brief, in my view, of developing the products that will meet those skills needs. They will need to work in with Jobs and Skills Australia, the newly formed body, whose focus will have two key priority areas. One is around the clean energy economy, and the other is around literacy and numeracy, digital capability for all Australians. And they are going to be two priority pieces of work. You'll hear more about that when Peter Dawkins joins us in January. So another plug for that session on the 25th of January for the first TAFE talks of next year. But sitting around that is a couple of other things that are important for people to be aware of. One is the piece of work happening around foundation skills, and there's a separate foundation skills advisory group, which has a very large group of people involved, including many of our colleagues who might be running Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific RTOs, and the voice around literacy and numeracy in regional and remote additionally is very, very strong. There's also a piece of work happening around the Accord, and the Accord is it's the university's Accord. It's about increasing opportunities for people to engage with higher education. We've been involved in the early stages of that, and that's important in terms of going forward. And then there's other work happening, and this is one that really every TAFE should make a submission to this. That's the RTO standards. Our QRC network met this morning, and the QRC network shared some thinking around the RTO standards. But I think this is one where we can expect all RTOs will probably put in a commentary. Therefore, every TAFE needs to put in some commentary around it so we are heard and are a voice. And that's due at the end of January. TDA will certainly be making a submission. But we do encourage every TAFE to make a submission into the RTO standards consultation. And then sitting around that are other things that are going on that you can't underestimate. And the vet data streamlining piece of work that a lot of your people within your TAFEs are involved in actually got specific budgetary allocation in the budget that was released in September, October. So it is a big piece of work in terms of streamlining vet data. And there's a granular concept to that. So we do encourage you to make sure that your TAFE is actually giving some input into what does it mean on the ground for your people. So I think they're the big ticket items that are happening in skills reform, but also in higher education reform, because that intersect between higher education and vocational education is for the first time really back on the table in a considered way. And it's very much in a considered way about what are the obstacles that prevent people moving between those sectors, accessing both those sectors, or indeed those who have probably had less opportunities to engage in skills development or higher education to participate. So I think they're the main ones, Mendel, at this point in time.
Thanks, Jenny. That was a great roundup. So in terms of our national advocacy, 2022 also seemed to be a year when we really started to harness the power of national collaboration across the TAFE network. So we're seeing more and more TAFEs benefit from sharing their knowledge and resources across state and territory borders, as well as the benefits of advocating for change with a strong TAFE voice. So Mary, I know this is something that the TDA board has led and supported, and I just wondered if you had any reflections on the national collaboration and if there are any areas where you'd like to see more progress on that front.
Thanks, Lyndall. I know from our member organisations in Victoria that this has been really important and right around the country. And I know there's great examples of that collaboration, in particular with resource development and with coping with transitions. We've all had a multitude of course transitions this year to cope with, and it's been great. Even sort of sharing ideas, sharing the anxiety, sharing the stress, and sharing everything about those transitions. And I think that's been really helpful to our members. But I think what we're starting to see is real trust around the country, and that leads to great collaboration. So that a lot of the collaboration that we've seen, in particular in regards to resource development, has been really valued, I think, right around the country, and there's great examples. And I think a big thanks to those really large organisations, TAFE Queensland and TAFE New South Wales, who have developed a lot of those materials, and with TAFEs reaching out. But there's also been great examples of smaller TAFEs here in Victoria and in other states that have developed specific material that is able to be used in other states. So it's a great example of leveraging the knowledge that we have around the country and the resources that are obviously available in some of the jurisdictions and not available in others. And so how we can ensure that we all have a level playing field in regards to resource development, and also that it's not that we're not all reinventing the wheel. And that was certainly the case with sharing the ideas about the transitions, and that we're not all reinventing the wheel of mapping those programs. So it's been a great year, and I'm really looking forward to furthering that collaboration. And I know there's great examples of the networks that TDA runs, and again, that they're great examples of collaboration across the jurisdictions. So Lyndall, was it only about the collaborations you wanted me to touch on there?
Yeah, that's right, Mary. Thank you. Margot, do you want to share any reflections of the benefits of national collaboration for a large institution like TAFE New South Wales?
Yes, thanks, Lyndall. And again, I really agree with Mary. I mean, TAFE New South Wales, we've got a huge scope, and we're really so happy to be contributing as part of this TDA network, so that we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel, as Mary said. So, for example, TDA has led networks that have done things like establish the TAFE Australia Shared Catalogue, which is fantastic, so that we can all see what each other has, so that rather than all of the different TAFEs developing the same things, we can actually share what we've already produced. And we've also got things like, through that same network, the generic TAFE assessment templates, so that we can actually share things more easily. We've certainly done lots of swapping and exchanging with the various TAFEs around the country. And we've also worked on things like a co-design and co-development model with TAFE Queensland, for instance, just as a starting point. Because rather than all of us investing in developing similar things, if we plan our approaches, then we can make sure that we each sort of leverage the efforts that we make, because we have this great power of a team. And I think that's in the sort of product development space. But there are also some of the good examples we've had of sharing great practice. So, for example, the networks that have been happening around what we can develop and share in terms of, say, the wraparound services that we have as part of fee-free TAFE. Because once we get these students in, if they're from very diverse backgrounds, we need to be able to support them more effectively. So the good practice we've seen in that space. And also one of the other challenges around workforce attraction. So I know that there have been network opportunities for sharing what the various TAFEs do in that space. So, for instance, we've just been successful with a sort of a pay-to-learn program that we piloted. We only had a very small number of about 15 or so applicants in the first group that went through, but they all completed the course. So it's a condensed program. It's supported by mentoring from great teachers. So all those things we've now rolled out, and we've attracted a much larger number of potential teachers to come in and fill some of those skills shortage gaps that we have. But sharing that practice so that we learn from other institutions. I know that there have been conversations between TAFE New South Wales and almost all the other TAFEs that have been fostered and enabled by TDA. And so we're really grateful about that.
Thanks, Margot. Grant, so as CEO of TAFE, have you seen any benefits from the national collaboration?
Thanks, Lyndall. Let's say TAFE's a small jurisdiction, small TAFE. So to have a national collaboration is extremely beneficial to us. And I do have to call out the generosity of colleagues across the country who have, shared resources, picked up the phone for discussions, done things that perhaps we might not have been doing in the past. And I call out to yourself and Jenny and the team at TDA that have helped facilitate that and help get us all back together again. I think we've also started to realise when people talk about TAFE, they're not, especially at a national level, they're not talking about TAFE or Holmes Glen or TAFE New South Wales. They're talking about TAFE as a brand, and that the more we share and the more we can get consistent, high quality products or courses into markets across the country, the better it is for all of us. And that, I think, is a paradigm shift we've had as a group that's probably only happened in the last 12 months and just so important. And the sharing of it's what's brought that along. So that's probably my main takeout from that national collaboration, Lyndall.
Thanks, Grant. Jenny, have you got any other comments to add on the national collaboration?
I think some of it has been mentioned, and I just wanted to just say briefly, we've got a range of collaborative networks. Some have been in place for a long, long time, like the Higher Education Network, which at the moment now will get the benefit of actually having those conversations together in terms of our representation through the Accord, but also the International Network, which has an opportunity there to leverage. And perhaps one of the, and then we've got some networks that are very specific to industry areas, such as the National Enrolled Nursing Network, who do challenge into their sector around things that they're seeing that they don't think meet the needs of TAFE in our delivery of the Diploma of Nursing adequately, or indeed for the industry. And I think that they're very, very strong. And this morning we had the Quality Network met, and the Quality Network has achieved some very significant, they sound like small wins, but they're quite significant. We've worked with ASQA on single messaging around transition times so that they weren't this ad hoc process of, we will suddenly transition everybody on the 14th of November when half our students were going to finish on the 30th anyway. So let's make it a more consistent date. And so those sorts of voices coming together allow us to represent you well through those networks, which without the voices coming together, then we're not always sure exactly what the priorities are for within the TAFE. So we encourage people to get involved, but the networks have certainly been strong, and they're certainly making a difference to the performance of TAFEs.
Thanks, Jenny. So the TDA Convention that we've just had in Adelaide, I think also highlighted the extent to which TDA members are collaborating. This is in terms of meeting skills needs in emerging industries like clean energy or cybersecurity, or ensuring quality and consistency in nursing qualifications, as you've just mentioned, Jenny, or in educator capability, to name a few. Margot, have you got any reflections on key highlights or key messages that were emerging from the TDA Convention this year?
Yeah, thanks, Lyndall. When I was reflecting back, I was really struck by the sort of synergies and the common themes that kept coming out. Fortunately for us, we've just released our 3-year strategic plan, and a lot of those themes around sustainability and participation and retention and diversity kind of wove in through the whole of the TDA Convention. I thought it was fantastic to have it back in face-to-face real person mode, because that's where the fantastic benefits of networking. I think it's sort of easier for people to maintain networks and connect with people if they've kind of had that chance to be standing around having a cup of tea together or a bit of cake for afternoon tea or whatever it is. So that was great. But it was interesting, there were a few moments like when Ellen Fanning was talking about her really personal experience of not being able to get a removalist. I was reflecting on what happens sometimes in a time of crisis is almost like a convergence. So we, for example, TAFE New South Wales, we knew that we couldn't meet all the transitioning training package requirements. We couldn't deal with all of these skills shortage areas. We couldn't deal with the workforce demand, all of those high pressure environmental factors that we're dealing with. It drives us to want to work closely with other TAFE partners, because that's where we can benefit from these networks, to just be able to do things like share strategies and share practices that we've each got in our own, because all TAFEs operate differently, and even within TAFEs there's lots of different practice. So to me, it's sort of sharing those good practice examples. We had some fantastic ones. We had BHP working with North Metropolitan TAFE in Western Australia, improving things like apprenticeships, which is an opportunity for all of us. We had fantastic examples from people like Chris Harris in William Angliss, talking about improving completion rates in some of the courses there by using an evidence-based approach. And I guess one of my final comments is around the benefit of Danielle Wood's presentation, because it reminds us about the power of data. So we've had lots of conversations since the TDA Convention here about how if we use data and evidence well, it can help bring even some of the naysayers along, because it provides them with data that can really help motivate and can act as a call to action almost, because once you have that evidence, it becomes a different conversation if we use the evidence correctly. And it was really good to see those themes coming through in international presentations as well. And I took my hat off to the people who popped up in the middle of the night to be able to present information for us to spark some of those conversations. So I really enjoyed the convention, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
On that, Margot, so one of the announcements at the convention was that TAFE New South Wales were going to be the host partner in 2024. So I wondered whether or not you had any early thoughts on what we can expect in Sydney in 2024.
Yeah, sure, Lyndall. It's I guess I'd first off shout out to TAFE SA, because boy, you were a hard act to follow. I think they really did a great job in TAFE SA of bringing in the voice of the students, making sure that we listened to their, and we observed. Sometimes we had sort of sessions where they were presenting to us, and so it was fantastic to bring in that voice that makes sure that we are connecting with our students as one of our key stakeholder groups. So I guess and Julie Tickle, our Chief People and Culture Officer, has already started working with Jenny and team for TDA to make sure that we build on the success of TAFE SA. I would say we'll do some things deliberately to showcase our size and our scale, because we've got so many campuses and so many communities that we work with so closely across the state. So we'll sort of bring in those voices. We've had some great success in diversity, and some of the wonderful examples we have of supporting really diverse student groups from, for example, remote and rural communities, to be able to achieve their goals. So we'll try and bring in some of those opportunities as well. We'll obviously try and harness some of the, we're still making decisions about where we'll be having the convention, but I think it'll have to be in a pragmatic kind of place so that we don't end up putting too much pressure on everyone to travel to really remote areas. But that means then we have to be able to bring that showcase element into what we're doing here. And also I would say there's a lot that we do around sort of community stewardship and really engaging with the communities that I think we'll try and bring in. Also the digital adoption we've had, connecting some of those really remote campuses. And at quite a granular level, there's some good practice we'd like to showcase around things like in our procurement processes, back to the diversity and inclusion piece, what we do at a really operational level to make sure that we build those things into our values. So to me, if you're going to get people together, it's a good chance to be sharing good practice and some of the lessons learned of, all the potholes that we've collectively or individually fallen into, but also the brains trust. To me, if you get a good group of clever, experienced people together, then you should use it. So I would say that networking that was a really good part of TAFE SA's program, we'll design that in, because that's really where the magic happens, I think, where people can really talk about some of the details. They have some time in the program to follow up with a presentation. You know, you might have seen something interesting and you want to ask a few more questions. So trying to build those things into the program, I think, is a real opportunity for us. But again, a shout out to TAFE SA.
Thanks, Margot. I think we might turn the discussion now to looking forward a bit to 2023. Mary, as we're on the theme of events, the TDA board will meet in Melbourne in August 2023 to coincide with World Skills. So for all of our audience, can you give us a quick rundown on what is World Skills and how can TAFE support it?
Great, thank you. I'm actually on the board of World Skills Australia. I've recently joined. I suppose in a quick way to describe it is World Skills is the Olympics for skills. Each of the state and territories engage in competitions. They go to regional competitions, then go to nationals. And from the nationals, a team is actually chosen to then go represent Australia. I think they're called the Skillaroos at an international competition. So the next international competition is in Lucerne no, it's not Lucerne, it's in France. Anyway, I can't think of the name of where it is, but it's in France in 2024. In August of next year, 2023, will be the national competition. So that's where each of the state and jurisdictions send teams, and a national team is then chosen from those competitions. It's a fantastic initiative, World Skills. I think it really does develop the skills and highlight skills across the world. And it's great benchmarking for us here in Australia in regards to our skill development and how we compare around the world. So it's something that I think through the work of World Skills Australia and the new CEO, or relatively new, Trevor Schwenke, and the board, led by Kevin Harris, who's the chair of the board, it really is something that we're focusing on in the next 12 months is promoting World Skills and ensuring that we have the best team that we can get to send to France in 2024. So it's a really exciting part of it. We had regionals at my institute recently. Fantastic to see the students compete in these competitions. They're very technical, the competition, and it really is a great test of their skills. So wonderful to see. So I encourage all of us to get involved in World Skills to make sure that we have got the best team to send internationally in 2024.
Thanks, Mary. Jenny, what are the key TDA events that people should get involved in 2023?
Well, TAFE Talks, of course. We met yesterday, our little team, and we've really plotted out the first 6 months of the year. And we've, of course, start the year on the last Wednesday in January with Peter Dawkins talking about Jobs and Skills Australia. So I think that's a bit of a coup to pull that forward into right up front for TAFE Talks. And then we have a series of other TAFE Talks planned, but we are also looking at a single online conference at the end of May, on the 31st of May, which will have a focus on access and equity. And we will have some keynote speakers at that, but also some sharing of practice around what is working and what is ways in which we can learn from each other. We're developing that as we go. And then further, as we keep tracking on down the year, we have a couple of small face-to-face events, including for CEOs, executives, and for others potentially across the sector. But also continuing to be really important is the work of the networks. And so we've stood up networks that we thought were really important. We will stand them down. We will support those networks as they need that sort of support. So for TAFEs, being involved in those networks or coming to us with ideas of what might be some collaboration that's needed and how you're going to lead, help support, lead that, because all our networks are chaired by a TAFE, not generally by TDA. They're supported by TDA, but not chaired by them. So that they are really professional development networks, as well as the opportunity to develop and identify areas that we need to advocate. So that they are some of the key things. We will have a CEO day linked around world skills in Melbourne, and the TAFE, the TDA board, of course, will continue to meet as well, and they will have one face-to-face event planned for Melbourne. So I think that gives a bit of a broad highlight of 2023. But the planning begins for TDA Convention 2024, which we're aiming at the moment to be May 2024 in Sydney. That's our plan. So it won't be towards the end of the year. It's really 18 months from the last convention. And so start putting aside your budgets and getting ready to come to Sydney and be part of that engagement with your colleagues in Sydney that people found so valuable just a few weeks ago in Adelaide.
Thanks, Jenny. So still on 2023, Mary, delivering the fee-free TAFE places is obviously going to be a big priority in 2023. What do you think some of the challenges are going to be? And do you have any words of advice for our audience today, given Victoria's prior experience with fee-free TAFE?
Okay, look, I think as Grant mentioned and Margot, it's, and I talked about it at the conference, I think it's imperative on us that we deliver on this initiative of the fee-free. It comes with a lot of challenges, and of course the biggest challenge that we've all got at the moment is we've got, which is great for the country, but full employment. And I'm not sure, and that's what struck me about the Skills Summit, is I still am not sure that people fully understand demand and supply, and that it's not just training providers that are responsible for generating demand. Industry has a big role to play here as well, but obviously we've got not only full employment, but we've got sort of people shortage as well. So how do we get those people into these places? Look, some of the learnings from Victoria, it commenced for us in 2019. It was a very busy year. We had oversubscribed in many respects to those fee-free places. I hope we get a positive response in 2023, but 2019 was very different to 2023 is going to be. It was also pre-COVID, so we've got COVID as well as what we've got with full employment. So I think that's a big issue, the demand and supply side, and I think the role of industry and how we engage with industry and industry organisations and regional ones as well in working together to generate demand for these fee-free places, because it's not just our role as TAFE institutes to go market. I mean, industry also has a big role to play in marketing, and I've often thought that the way that we do careers days and all the providers go out and sell their wares, it's probably the wrong way around. It actually should be industry that goes out and sells their industry. And then, people then choose where to go to study. So I think we've got to rethink that whole supply and demand issue. And so I think that's going to be a real challenge for us next year. I think that I'm pleased to see that we've got the additional funding for wraparound services and obviously foundation skills as well that the Minister is very keen on. But I think also the notion of attrition, not only in apprenticeships, but now across the board, is going to be a factor too. And how do we understand attrition fully? I had, if I can just digress for 1 minute, and I won't take long, but I had one of the biggest learnings for me out of the convention, was not out of the convention, but I went to get my hair done at the hairdresser at the hotel. And I got talking to the young apprentice, and this is the types of things that we should not forget as providers, this experience. Her family lived 4.5 hours away from Adelaide. She was 15. She saved up for a little caravan. She's a bit of a go, this kid. She was fantastic. So she saved up for a little caravan, and they brought the caravan down to Adelaide. She got into she got an apprenticeship. She could only stay at caravan parks for 2 weeks at a time, because then they have to move and you're not allowed to go back to, you can't be seen to be living in a caravan. Her parents had to come down and move the caravan every time she moved, every 2 weeks. She'd been to 9 caravan parks already. There was only another 4 left in Adelaide before the year is up, and then she was hoping to go back home for a holiday. She tried to get accommodation, but it was just too difficult, too expensive, and basically all her money went on the caravan park fees anyway. And she just said at 15 it was pretty hard to find accommodation, you know, in a share house, because, you know, a very vulnerable kid. And listening to this, I thought, one of the reasons why there's attrition in a lot of courses is because of what goes on in these young people's lives. So I thought it was a great lesson. You know, we do know this from our own organisation, but it actually just brought it all home in regards to that whole discussion about attrition. So attrition, I think, is going to be an issue for us unless we get on top of it with those wraparound services. And what we found in Victoria is that there was a greater need. But of course, we then had COVID, as all of us have had, but a greater need for support for a lot of students, whether it's academic support, whether it's counselling support, financial support, to actually get through the program. So having, you know, build it and they will come, great, but having something to help them get through is probably the bigger issue, I think, for us to be successful. So there's going to be a lot of work for us all. As we know, it's very rewarding work, dealing and delivering education and training, but it will be quite complex and I think challenging for us. But it is imperative that we succeed and ensure that we are able to fulfil these places in 2023.
Thanks, Mary. I'm conscious of time, but I just wondered whether Jenny Dodge, you wanted to give us a quick 1-minute rundown of priorities for Jobs and Skills Australia. You've already touched on them, a few of them, but how do you see TAFE engaging with JSA in 2023?
I think there's a, you know, we started off by saying there's commentary that TAFEs are the anchor of the vocational education and training sector as presented by this Commonwealth Government. And therefore, I think that opportunity will be actively there to engage with Jobs and Skills Australia. And the fact that Peter has accepted our invitation within only being appointed within a couple of days to speak speaks volumes about the willingness to consult. The second thing I think people do need to remember is the National Skills Commission rolls into Jobs and Skills Australia, and Margot mentioned evidence, and I think that they've done tremendous work in presenting the evidence of where there are forecasting future demand, forecasting current shortages, and so on. And so I think that engagement has been strong with the National Skills Commission for some years. That terminology, of course, changes, but the people go with it. And then thirdly, for TAFEs to be involved, for those of you working with specific industry clusters, that connection has to continue to be there as well. How do we get that voice into each of those specific industry areas that we deliver to industry's demands, where there's skill needs, and work with those industry clusters? So I think there's going to be a range of ways that we will be able to engage. We welcome the independent advisory body that Jobs and Skills Australia will be. That in itself bodes well, I think, for being able to forecast in bigger picture situations for Australia into the future.
Thanks, Jenny. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. I'm wondering whether there are any panel members who would like to type an answer to the first one which is around strategies like respect and equality in TAFE, violence prevention framework, whether anyone would like to type an answer to that one, and whether a panelist would like to answer a question from Kevin Hayes, which is that the nature of work is changing in the 21st century. Blended learning, community and environmental services need more attention. How can we better build a resilient and supported workforce and lifelong or longer life learning and inclusivity? Margot, Grant, would you like to have a go at that one? Or?
I'll do a quick type in.
We've got 1 minute, Margot.
Well, I was just going to say, and I'll type in a response about the second question about blended learning. I read this great article. People might have seen Campus Morning Mail yesterday, had an article by Martin Betts and David Kellerman talking about if we use telehealth, people are never going back from the convenience of being able to use telehealth. So anybody who thought we were sort of slinging back to whatever the opposite to blended learning is, I don't think that'll be the case, but I'll put a link to that article in. I think that's our future. We absolutely have to be better at harnessing the good things from face-to-face and the good things for digital, because if we weren't doing that already, we absolutely can't go backwards. But you told me I had less than a minute.
Yes, thanks, Margot. We have run out of time today, but I'd like to thank all of our panel members for their time. It's been a really great discussion reflecting on the year that was. And we look forward to welcoming everyone back to TAFE Talks in the new year. So thanks, everyone.